looking at the Torah and Judaism, and we're working out if it's possible that the Torah could have been written by a human being or not. Who is the author of this piece of literature? So a very brief introduction to myself. My name's Dov Bear, and I grew up in England and in a traditional family, and I went to Manchester University to study philosophy. And whilst I was there, I developed the 3 questions of living a well thought out life. Number 1 question of living a well thought out life is, what do you believe? What do you believe? Most people actually fall at question 1. They're not sure what they believe. If you ask most people, do you believe you have a soul? Number 1 answer is, yeah, I guess so, maybe, I hope so. I started asking people over 85 years old, do you believe in life after death? And once again, the number 1 answer was, I hope so. They hadn't really clarified what they believe. So that's the number 1 question you ask yourself. What do you believe? Many people don't even want to look into this question. You know, I'm just trying to get food on the table and feed my family. Don't get all philosophical on me, you know. Number 2 question is, why do you believe that? Who here believes they have a soul? Oh, that's excellent. According to Judaism, you're all wrong, by the way. Judaism teaches you are a soul, you have a body. But whatever, different class, Kabbalah, something. But anyway, why do you believe you have a soul? Someone who said they believe they have a soul, why? Why do you believe you have a soul? There you go. So, pardon? Nice. An atheist is also drawn to do nice things. Also, I think an atheist is also drawn to find meaning. Most atheists I know are very nice people. Excellent. Buddhists, by the way, don't believe you have a soul. And they feel they're living a meaningful life too. But I hear that. So what you guys are basically saying is you don't really know why you believe it. You believe it because your parents told you, or because you need to believe it. Most people are religious for one of 2 reasons. Number 1, because they were brought up that way. Number 2, because they have some sort of emotional lack, an emotional need. I need meaning in my life, so I'm going to make up that there's a God and a religion. Or I'm afraid of what happens after death, so I'm going to make up religion. So most of religion is a crutch, really, to fill in some emotional lacking. If you were born in India, you would believe in many gods. And you'd probably be a farmer and you'd eat lots of rice. And if you were born in China, you'd be a communist and be a farmer and eat lots of rice. If you were born in Mea Shearim, 2 kilometers from here, you would all have 10 children by now and eat lots of rice as well. Most people just become a product of their society. We believe what we believe because our parents told us, or it feels good to us, or we need to believe it. You spoke before about the difference between faith and knowledge. So that takes me to the 3rd question, really. The 3rd question is, how do you know you're right? First question, what do you believe? Do you believe you have a soul? Yes. Why do you believe you have a soul? Because my mum told me, or because I feel I'm drawn towards meaning. How do you know you're right? And as you heard in the introduction, you can only know you're right if you have evidence. What's your solid evidence? Rational, empirical evidence to show that what you believe is true. That's the scientific way to do things. So I was at university and I started asking this question to lots of people, and I realized that very, very few people are living a well thought out life. And even worse than that, very few people are living a deeply happy, connected, joyful life. I did another experiment. I asked people, how are you? And the top 5 answers to the question, how are you, were can't complain, not too bad, getting by, could be worse, hanging in there. This is basically, and I thought, hold on, very few people are that happy. My grandfather died when he was 100 years old. And he said to me, when he was about 95, he said, you don't want to live a nice should have life. So I said, what do you mean? And he said, once you get to 90, you've got not that much to look forward to. So you look back on your life, I really should have spent more time with my kids, less time at work. I should have not let what other people think about me affect me so much. I should have been to the gym more, traveled more. And he said to me, you can live your life from today in a certain way that when you get to 90, you're not regretting your life. You're thinking amazing. So I was like, great, I'm going to work out what's the purpose of life. So I looked at Western culture, and I saw that that's not the purpose. It can't be the purpose because very few people are happy or inspired. And I looked at Judaism on a very surface level, and I thought, that can't be the answer. I don't think there's an angry man in the sky with a list of rules, and if I don't follow his rules, he's going to punish me. And that's my very superficial understanding of Judaism. So I ended up spending 6 years living in Asia. So I lived in Sri Lanka for 4 months, and in Thailand for a year and a half, and in a small island off the coast of Korea for a year and a half, Jeju Island, beautiful island, and in Nepal and China and Japan and India, many places. And I spent most of my time really delving into philosophies and religious practices. So I did very many 10-day silent meditation retreats. No reading, no writing, no listening to music, no phones, nothing, just you and your mind. And people say, don't you go crazy? And I'm like, yeah, a bit. I'm a bit crazy. But just to work out how does the mind work, what's the purpose, what am I meant to be doing? I taught Buddhism in universities in Thailand, and did lots of yoga retreats, and I did the whole Eastern path. And I kept asking my questions, what do you believe? What do you believe? So I could give you a whole class on Buddhist philosophy and Hindu philosophy and Christian philosophy. And then I'd ask, why do you believe this? And it was generally because that's our tradition, or because I came to it in meditation. And I was like, yeah, but he came to that in his meditation. So. And then my final question is, how do you know you're right? And at that point, no one had a really good answer. So I was like, okay, we'll see, how am I going to live my life? What makes the most sense for living my life? Someone once asked Gandhi, are you a Hindu? And Gandhi said, yes, I'm also a Buddhist, a Muslim, a Christian, and a Jew. Which really is one of the most sweet, universalist, sentimental, loving, and illogical things you can really say, because you can't be a Christian and a Buddhist. They believe in very, very different things. And he certainly wasn't a Jew, unless there's something I don't know about his mother. But I don't think he was a Jew. So I was going to go to South America and canoe down the Amazon, but I popped into Israel for 3 weeks 12 years ago. And someone said, why don't you learn about Judaism? And I said, because on the surface level, it doesn't seem so good. But I started learning, and I saw that all of the wisdom and even meditative practices that I found in the East, we have in Judaism. It's a little harder to find sometimes, but we have this in Judaism. But then I started asking my question, how do you know you're right? So they said, go to Asia Torah. They'll show you. So I walked into Asia Torah. I thought I was a spiritual master. I fasted once for 7 days. I had 2 cups of water. It wasn't a full fast. 2 cups of water and a small slice of papaya on summer days. I thought I'm a spiritual master. These naive rabbis, can't turn on a light on Saturday, and I'm a master. How do you know you're right? And they said, okay, well, we have 5 pieces of evidence, compelling evidence that there's no way the Torah could have been written by a human being. I said, go and show me then. So they showed me the evidence that you're going to be seeing today. And there's something called cognitive bias. I did philosophy at university, and I did pay some attention. Cognitive bias means you find evidence for what you want to believe, and you ignore evidence for what you don't want to believe. It's cognitive bias. So I came into this with a very strong cognitive bias against believing that the Torah could have been written by God, because there was no way I wanted to be a religious Jew. It just didn't look fun or spiritual or anything good about it. So this evidence has to be strong enough to override my cognitive bias. And I sat down with the evidence, and I eventually spent about 6 months fighting and arguing, and I took the evidence and I put it on atheist forums on the internet. And I said, I need you to help me refute this evidence, because if I can't refute the evidence, then I'm going to have to be a religious Jew. I don't want to be a religious Jew. Years later, no one has ever given me a strong refutation of the evidence. I keep saying evidence, by the way, because there's no such thing as proof. Did he talk about this a little bit? There's no such thing as 100% proof. If I told you that the whole world was created last Tuesday, could you prove me wrong? No, those memories were put in your mind when you were created last Tuesday. Those newspapers were created last Tuesday. anything you say, I'm going to say your body at this age and your memories and the newspapers and the photos, they were all created last Tuesday to make you think the world's older. Now, pardon? Everything, the whole universe, with all of you at your age, was created last Tuesday. Pardon? Yeah. So, if you believe that, if you now believe that, you've got to be crazy. Because the evidence, the newspapers and the memories and the body, most of the evidence is pointing towards the fact that it wasn't created last Tuesday. But there's no proof. There's no 100% proof. Do you know you have a hand with 5 fingers? No, you could be a brain in a jar and there's an evil person. But you'd be crazy to believe that. So there's nothing called 100% proof. So what we're trying to do is get all the evidence and go beyond a reasonable doubt. What's a reasonable doubt? An example I give is if I come up to you and say I've got a piano in my house. Do you believe me or not? Well, you walk past the house and you hear piano music. So you could say, no, actually that was just a TV program. But then you walk past, or the radio, you walk past and there's piano practicing music. And you say, well, someone's practicing in the program. But then you see my bank account and there's a $2,000 payment to Pianos Are Us. And you say, well, you paid for it, but then you sent it to your friend's house. And then you see in the garbage, you see a delivery thing to my house. So now the piano's been delivered to my house, and you can say, well, it might have been delivered to your house, but then you moved it to your friend's house. And then I turn up at a party 1 month later, and I can now play the piano a bit. And you're like, well, you could always play the piano, you never... Eventually, you can never have 100% proof, but the evidence becomes big enough where it would be crazy not to go with the evidence. So that's why we always talk about evidence, not proof. So fine, the one we're going to be doing today, is called national revelation. Because it's light outside. That's how we define day. So let's look at all the religions of the world today. I'm not even talking about what's written in the Torah. Today, we ask a Christian, what do you believe? What happened? How did your religion start? So a Christian today would say that Jesus was crucified, and 3 days later, he got resurrected. Who saw him? Mary Magdalene and another Mary. Depends on what gospel. The gospels don't all say the same thing. And then he basically got resurrected, and his 12 apostles saw him, and then he rose up to heaven. So what we have is 1 or 12 people saying that something happened and then convincing everyone else that it happened. If you ask a Muslim, how did Islam start? What would he say? Basically, Muhammad came down from wherever he was. Apparently, he learnt with the angel Gabriel for 27 years, actually. He got the Quran from there. But basically, one guy came out and said, this is what I heard from God, and now he persuaded everyone to believe him, and everyone believed him. How did Buddhism start? There was one man, Siddhartha Gautama, who sat under the Bodhi tree. How long did he sit under the Bodhi tree, by the way? I lived there for 2 months. It's in Bihar in India. He sat there, according to Buddhist legend, for 49 days, which is interesting. Counting of the Omer is... Anyway, so he sat there. And then he said, I found the truth of existence, and then he persuaded everyone else. If you ask an Orthodox Jew today, how did Judaism begin? What would they say? They would say that God spoke to 3 million people at Mount Sinai. This is a very different claim. Every single religion in the world starts with one person, or 12. Paul on the road to Damascus had a vision. Every religion starts with one person, and then it gets spread out from there. Judaism, I believe, and 2 million Jews alive today believe that God spoke to 3 million people. It's a very different claim. What's a more powerful claim, by the way? What's a more strong claim, at least? Whether it's true or not, what's a better claim? God spoke to everyone. It's a much better claim. Imagine there was a king, and he had 3 sons. And the king dies, and they didn't choose who was going to be his successor. So they're fighting over it. And then one day, one of the sons comes down and says, our father appeared to me in a dream and said that I will be the new king. Is that any evidence? No, because if the Father can appear to someone in a dream, he should appear to all of them in a dream, or at least the two other ones, and say, he's the new king. So having one person saying that something happened and being very charismatic and everyone believes him, there's no evidence there. Saying 3 million people heard God speak is much, much stronger. We're not talking about whether it's true or not yet, but it's a much stronger claim. Why hasn't anyone else made that claim? It's a better claim. Someone else should surely have made that claim, and no one ever has. So we're really going to look into how can that claim ever be made if it didn't happen. And also, we're going to have a second stage, which is the main stage. Maybe I'm going to wait. We'll build up to it. But the real evidence comes through the second stage. Do you have a question?
Yeah, you said about a dream, why didn't he appear in all of the people? So why didn't getting you said the witness were 3 million people, but then why not to all?
Excellent. So God spoke to 3 million people, but we believe that the whole world knew. The whole world stopped at that point, and everyone knew that God had given the Torah to the Jewish people.
So it was actually not only 3 million.
Well, he only spoke to the 3 million, but everyone else knew about it. Okay, so let's work it out. How did it happen? So I believe 2 million people nowadays believe it. All the way back, let's say King David. Really verifiable Jewish history starts, let's say, with King David. Taught to Ken Spiro, but that's where we can really verify it. At King David's time, there were 2 million Jewish people about who also believed that God spoke to every single Jewish person at Sinai. Man, woman, child, every single person had. By the way, Christians believe this too, and Muslims believe this too. Until about 250 years ago, every Jew, at least, believed that God spoke to every Jew at Mount Sinai. And all Christians and all Muslims. How did that start? I'm not even asking what happened in the Torah. How did this legend start? It either did happen, or it was a lie or a hoax, someone put it out there somehow. So let's talk out the scenarios. You've got to stay with me here. But let's say, for example, there's only two possibilities. One man persuaded a mass group of people, or one or a few men started it very small, started this lie very small. For example, with Christianity, you have the 12 disciples, and there are 12 of them, and they basically said Jesus was resurrected, and they started that, and then many people believed it. So let's work out all the scenarios one by one. Number one, Moses comes along, like Muhammad, and he says to the whole nation, by the way, he just wrote this book in his bedroom. He wrote the book, Moses wrote the book, and he wants everyone to believe the book. So he comes out and says, you all heard God speak at Mount Sinai. Did they believe him? Why didn't Muhammad come down and say, why did Muhammad say, I heard God speak? Why didn't Muhammad say, we all heard God speak? Because you didn't. Great. Philosophically, how does this pan out? I can persuade you of something when there's no evidence for it. I can persuade you of crazy things when there's no evidence for it. Actually, one thing I didn't tell you about my story is that as I was traveling the world, I tightrope walked across the Niagara Falls. I did a tightrope walk, it was amazing, with my eyes closed.
Now we don't believe you.
No, but I actually did. Well, okay, so I didn't. But I could persuade you. If I was charismatic enough, I'm quite charismatic actually. I could actually persuade you that I did. What if I came up to you and said, you tightrope walked across the Niagara Falls blindfolded? You'd be like, I didn't. So you can persuade someone of something if there's no evidence. But you can't persuade someone of something against the evidence. I can't tell you something that goes against what you know to be true. This is why Muhammad didn't say you all heard God speak. You can't get away with that. Okay, that, by the way, in philosophical circles is called the present lie. It's saying, I'm trying to tell a lie, a hoax, to start a religion, and how do I do it? Present. You guys heard it, so the present lie doesn't work. So now we need to look what most theologians do who who are trying to go against the Torah, they say there must have been something called the past lie. So you can't get away with the present lie. So what I'm going to say to you now is, you didn't hear God speak. Of course you didn't. But your ancestors did. And by the way, this fits in very nicely with the story that I have today. The story I have today is my ancestors all heard God speak. And my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather, we all believe that our ancestors heard God speak. So the past lie is actually quite good because it fits into my present theology. So I come up to you guys and I say, hi, you million people. You didn't hear God speak, but our ancestors, every single one of them, 3 million of our ancestors, they all heard God speak. Thank you very much. And you're like, hallelujah, let's keep Shabbos. By the way, in general, there's a cognitive bias against accepting the Torah. They don't want the Torah to be true because they want to eat pig and they don't want to not work on Shabbos. So the evidence has to be very strong for you to even accept it, by the way. I'll just tell you a very side point. I was thinking the other day, most people who come to Discovery or learn about proofs and evidence, they don't want the Torah to be true because they don't want to live in line with the Torah. But if they were thinking about it, you should really want it to be true, really want this to be true. But that's a side point. So fine, can I get away with the past lie? Yeah?
You could try, except then we would run to our grandfather, who possibly might be alive, and ask him if he heard.
There you go. So, you go, hold on. Okay, really? Go. So grandfather, why didn't you tell me about this? Well, what's your name?
Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. Did you know that your great-great-grandfather was the president of America? Well, he was. Do you believe me? Oh, really? Thank you for... Maybe another James. Your great-grandfather was the president of America. Do you believe me?
No.
Why not? Okay, maybe. What I wanted to say was, because surely you would have heard about it. Surely you would have heard about it. If all of our great-great-great-grandparents stood at Mount Sinai and heard God speak, why didn't they ever tell? You're coming along, you've just written a book, they all heard God speak. And you're like, what? And by the way, I've got a law in the book, it's called Pesach. You have to tell the story from generation to generation forever. It's not that they forgot to tell the story, there's a commandment, you've got to tell the story that we left Egypt and we heard God speak. So the past lie doesn't work either. Past lie doesn't work because A, you'd ask your grandparents, and B, you'd be like, I know that it didn't happen because something so significant happening would have been passed down, especially when the book itself says, pass it down. So what I'd have to then say to you is, I hear this, and there are people who teach in universities, in colleges in America who say this. What had to have happened was that they all heard God speak, but then there was a tragedy. There was an avalanche or an earthquake and they all died. And me, Gary, I've come along and I've refound it and I'm bringing it back to you. You're a million people. Here, I found it again. They all died. There were 3 million people. They all died in an earthquake. But I've refound the Torah and now we're going to live according to the Torah. People teach this. Could that work? No, why? Heard about what? Yeah, great. So why am I not walking around with a story today saying, and then there was a terrible earthquake, avalanche, and they all died? We don't have that story, isn't in our mindset. We don't have that. That's not part of our history. Another very important point to imagine is, let's say there was that guy who said, everyone died, but I refound it. Who is that guy? Who is Gary? We know who Abraham is. You know who Abraham is? You know who Yaakov is? You know who Mordechai and Esther were? Anyone who did anything significant in Jewish history, we know who they are. And we dress up like them on Purim. If there was a man who rediscovered the Torah, we would know who that was. There is no Gary. I don't know. I don't have a Gary festival. So the past lie can't work either. present lie doesn't work, past lie can't work. Just for completion's sake, you can have the future lie, which is you didn't hear God speak, but your children will. That obviously doesn't work because that's not the story I have. I don't have a story that my children will hear it. I have the story that our ancestors heard it. So future lie can't work, present lie can't work, past lie can't work. We're in a bit of a pickle now because there's no way this story could have started with one man persuading a mass of people. Fine. So now there's another possibility. And by the way, you guys I want you to start thinking of scenarios. I spent 6 months coming up with scenarios, go to my rabbis, like, what about this? So how about this? There's a couple of guys, and they decide what we're going to do is we're going to make up a religion, and then we're going to raise our children believing in the religion. And then they'll all believe it. That's a good one. Few people start persuading some people.
But it does work because millions of people do believe different religions.
No, that's against evidence. That just say Christianity, 100%. Muslim, Islam. So there's one guy saying, but what is his claim? The claim he's making, the point is, what claim is he making? Muhammad's claiming, God spoke to me. I'm trying to start a religion and pass it to my children, saying that God spoke to 3 million people. So let's say I take one or a few people, and I'm trying to start the religion slowly, like Christianity and Buddhism and Islam started. That works, no? Yeah, great. Let's go and be Buddhists. It's much better. Thank you. Good night. Why doesn't it work? Why can't that work? I just wrote a book in my bedroom, persuade my kids, bring up my kids. So eventually you have 200 people who are walking around with the belief, because I've raised them like this, with the belief that God spoke to 3 million people at Mount Sinai. Why doesn't that work? You guys are like, yeah, it does work. Oh. It's great. We've got other pieces of evidence. The Purim thing's much better. It's the same answer as the past lie. Where are those 3 million people? What happened to them? Who are these few families that restarted the religion? If you're going to start your religion, you want to get some credit for it. Look at me. We started a religion. I don't know who these people are. And there aren't 3 million, there's no explanation for what happened to those 3 million people. So it can't even start with a few people persuading many people. Very different claim. Whew. So how do we have this? If it didn't happen, how do you get away with saying it happened? So can anyone think of any other scenarios? I'm going to give you 2 minutes now. Speak amongst yourself. Someone once said, what happened? They were walking through the desert, and they had a mass mushroom trip. There were mushrooms in the desert. They were very hungry, and they ate the mushrooms. And they all had a trip, and they all experienced the same thing.
I love that one.
That's an excellent one. So I actually tried it out with the yeshiva students to see if that could work. I gave them all mushrooms, and they didn't have the same trip. So I think it's impossible. That's a joke. Very unlikely that you got away with a joint mushroom trip. A joint mushroom trip. Anything else? Any other ideas? How about this one? There was thunder and lightning, and I come down and I say, guys, that was God speaking. And you're like, oh, that was God speaking. Wow. That's the best one, by the way. Okay, but I can persuade you. By the way, it says you heard the words. I'm trying to do this whole class not looking at what the Torah says about this, because I'm talking about the idea we have, our national history, what we think. But I did photocopy this for you. But it does. The Torah says, Moses called to all of Israel, face to face did God speak with you on the mountain. And again, it keeps saying the words. You heard the words of God. Words. But let's say I'm really, really charismatic and I've got lots of whips and things. And I could say, no, that thunder was words. That actually could work. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. It's so easy to brainwash our kids. Well, so here, pass this out. This, by the way, is the main piece of evidence. Everything I've said so far, by the way, for me, this is kind of enough already. I'm like, that's pretty amazing. But this is the crux, main, core piece of evidence that we have. It says here in Parshas Vayeschanan, chapter 4, starting verse 25. Chapter 4, 25. Has everyone got one? There might not be enough for everyone, so you can share. It says this. Moses is speaking to the Jewish people. Moses is speaking to the Jewish people, and he says to them this: when you beget children and grandchildren, and you will have been long in the land. So this is talking about the future. You, by the way, when he says you, you're going to see this. He's talking to the people in front of him, and he's saying the word you, even talking about future generations. So it means Israel, the Jewish people. You will have been long in the land. You will grow corrupt and make a carved image, and you will do evil in the eyes of Hashem. And I appoint heaven and earth this day to bear witness against you that you will surely perish from the land. You will not have lengthy days upon it. You will be destroyed. Hashem will scatter you amongst the people. So this is the destruction of the temple. Moses is saying to them, you're going to go into the land, and you're going to worship idols, and Hashem's going to kick you out of the land. And you'll be few in number. You just had the whole 7 wonders of Jewish history. And you'll serve gods, the handiwork of man. In the future, you will start seeking Hashem, your God. And you will find him if you search for him with all your heart. For Hashem is a merciful God. Now look, verse 32. So I'm talking to the whole Jewish people throughout all the generations. Talking to you now who got kicked out of Israel. But you found God and you came back to Israel. Verse 32. For inquire now regarding the early days that preceded you, from the beginning of creation, from the day when God created man on earth, and from one end of the heaven to the other end of heaven. Has there ever been anything like this great thing, or has anything like it been heard? Has a people ever heard the voice of God speaking from the midst of the fire as you have heard and survived? The Torah, whoever wrote the Torah, is claiming that no one else will ever make the claim that God spoke to the whole nation and survived. The Torah, whoever wrote the Torah 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, says that you guys sitting in Discovery today, if you ask a Christian, they won't say that God spoke to all the Christian people. If you ask a Muslim, they won't say that God spoke to all the Muslims. If you ask a Buddhist, a Hindu, no one will ever say this claim. There's a claim in this book that says that this is a unique thing in history. Now the question is, if there was a man or a group of men or women who got away with this in some way, they managed to get away with it. I persuaded you that the thunder is God's voice. How could they guarantee that that would never happen again? If they themselves got away with it, then anyone else, Muhammad could say that thunder was God speaking. But never again in the whole of history do we ever see anyone making this claim. And it's such a good claim to make. Yeah.
If the claim is so good, why is there only a few amount of people that believe it? Like, it's so clear and obvious.
Because not everyone's been to... By the way, most
theological. So.
people come to Discovery, they see the evidence, and they don't want it to be true, and they say, okay, you brainwashed me, I don't know. And we have cognitive bias. So by the way, there are other semi-claims. Incas, for example, say that God's some sort of revelation happened, but that's a claim that there was a claim, and here it says, has anyone heard God speaking from the midst of the fire and survived? There's no Incas walking around today saying, we all heard God speak. So for me, this is actually the main thing. What whoever wrote the Torah did was he made Judaism the only falsifiable religion in the world. He made the Torah falsifiable, because all you need to do is find one more religion that makes this claim. That's a big, risky thing to do. Christianity isn't falsifiable. You just say, I believe or I don't believe. Why, if you're going to sit in a cave and write your own book and pretend that God wrote it, would you then make it so easily falsifiable? And so far we have seen that No one else has ever made this claim. And no one will, because you cannot make this claim unless it happened. So as one of my Rebbes, Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman, said, that the challenge of life isn't working out what's true. That's quite obvious when you see the evidence. The challenge of life is living with integrity once you know that it's true. Any questions? Let's go and pray and sing. Great. My email address is dbcohen@aish.com. dbcohen@aish.com. If you would like to ask questions, please do. I just want to end on one little thing. The reason I believe what I believe is completely based on rational evidence. But my Jewish practice and my relationship with God has got nothing to do with rational intellect. It's completely to do with my heart and my soul. Many people get stuck in intellect. Judaism is all about the heart. It says in the Gemara, Rachmana liba boy, Hashem wants your heart. So Judaism is not about knowing that God wrote the Torah or knowing that God exists. It's about feeling it deeply, having an authentic, palpable, sweet, real-time relationship with God. And that's got nothing to do with the evidence. But we need the evidence so that we have a solid empirical foundation for what we believe. Yeah.
Even if you're able to prove that the Torah is true and Revelation is true, so how does that impact us today that obligates us to keep the Torah?
No, you don't have to. But once you've got the guidebook, it would be silly not to. The Zohar, the main book of Kabbalah, actually says that the mitzvahs are pieces of advice. Hashem's giving it is a kind of non-optional advice. It's advice that you really should be doing for your own sake. But this is more of a philosophical question rather than is the evidence good or not. Yeah, why should I do it just because I know it's true? You don't have to. But we say there are consequences. Not punishment in hell, but there are consequences. If you're given the guidebook to perfect yourself and you're not doing it, then it's a shame you haven't done what you're meant to be doing here. Yeah.
Have any Christian philosophers or corrupt religions tried answering this? Is there any material where they tried?
I've tried for 12 years. No one's ever.
Really?
Come on.
Yeah, that's interesting.
No. And it's basically cognitive bias. If you don't want it to be true, you just won't. And you're going to see their amazing codes and stuff. And people try to argue it. So if you go to a website and you find something against it, you'll immediately believe the website. Because you're like, don't even need to read it, but as long as there's anything against it, once again, there's no such thing as 100% proof. But there's far, far beyond a reasonable doubt evidence. And it makes logical sense to live according to the evidence. Yeah.
You said that future Jew theories, when you try to say that your kids will something happen to your kids. What's stopping you saying that like Mashiach, there's a future theory that like in the future people come back from like the dead and we'll have like their temple. But how do you know that's not?
Okay, so that's the next question, and you're going to come and learn in yeshiva for 3 months. Once we know that God wrote the Torah, how can we trust the rabbis, the authority of the rabbis and the oral Torah? But today we're just working out, did God write the Torah? And then we've got to work out, well, what does that mean for us and how does that come in practice? So, Eish Torah, 3 months, perfect. Thank you.